Very grateful to Yvonne and Monica and Shira for having formed this group. It gives us a container, a space for sharing that's safe. And as Yvonne said, some of what we talk about is considered pretty out there or maybe even crazy. And I'll briefly touch on my experience of that happening to me way back when. So I'm aware that we create this event together, and we do that with our attention and with our combined energy. And what I'm going to be talking about is very tender. It's sometimes difficult for me to speak it. It might be difficult for some of you to hear it. And so because my older brother and I were in the back seat messing around, and I bumped the door handle, the door flew open, and the car was going 60 miles an hour, and I was sucked out of the car and landed on my head on the gravel next to the car. So unfortunately, I don't have time to go into a lot of this, but this is a picture of me. I'm on the right there. When I was 3 before that accident. And this is a picture of me about 6 months after the accident. And if I go back, I think if you look in my eyes and my face, you can see that there's a lot of difference in there. When I fell out of the car, I was knocked unconscious. We had to drive 30 miles on a rural Wisconsin highway to a little clinic where they took me in. I woke up in the clinic screaming. They wrapped me up with sheets. This is what I saw. I just saw bright white light. So I'm not going to go into everything that happened with all of that. My parents told me after, when I was growing up, they said, "Oh, when you were 3, you fell out of the car. You had 10 stitches. You were fine." And that wasn't true, although I thought it was true for a while. And I'm probably a psychologist dealing with trauma and abuse now because of trying to figure out what happened to me and how I was. And in a nutshell, as an adult, trying to come close to my childhood experience, I would find that I would either veer away because it was too painful, or I would become that child and just be the pain and the suffering. One of the things I learned later was that when I was driving home with my parents to Ohio, I was in the back seat with my head on a pillow, resting on my mom's lap, and I was reaching up for her, wanting to be comforted. And she thought I was too fragile, too wounded to comfort me. And that emotional pain was actually much stronger than the physical pain, and the physical pain was plenty strong. So that was a function that I would either veer away from or become. And what I learned as a therapist working with this is that the adult part of us needs the support of our spirit in order to tolerate the pain of some of these childhood woundings. And when you do that, then you can just be right there next to the child, witness it, and then healing does happen. So it turns out that that's true, I think, for trying to deal with our own spiritual self, touching bases into our deeper self. So I wish I had more time, but I'm going to go on from that and talk about an experience I had when I was 21. This is Baba Ram Dass, and he passed away about a month ago. And I was really sad about that. I miss him. I told Dana, uh-oh, it's time for us to be the grown-ups now. But he and Swami Muktananda came to Stanford University in October of 1970. It was the first time Muktananda was in the country, and Ram Dass was acting basically as his pitchman. And in the course of that talk, Ram Dass said, imagine that you're on a bridge over a river, and the river includes everything in time and space. It includes your thoughts, your feelings, your senses, the idea of being on a bridge over a river. All of that is in time and space. And there's still something there that's not in the river. And so I was listening to this. I closed my eyes. I had an interest in spirituality, but I had no real knowledge of what spirituality was. I was raised Catholic and didn't like that, and so I didn't have a context for what was happening to me. But what did happen was I could feel the blood circulating through my body, and I had noticed that my breathing would continue. And when I had the thought of, oh, I don't have to keep making all this happen, it just keeps going. And as soon as I had that thought, I was outside of my mind. I was outside of my body. I was in the immensity of the universes, multiple, and I was in bliss. Now, this was a sharp contrast to where I was in my life, in my personal life. I was going to graduate that fall, and I was going to be drafted, and I was in the paradox of, I don't want to go to Vietnam, I don't want to go to prison, and I don't want to move to Canada. So, and the heartbreak at that time, the polarization between people was really, really rough. It actually reminds me of now, but so bliss was such a contrast to where I had been. So I was in bliss. Everything kept going with this program. Eventually, I opened my eyes and I looked around like I'm looking around this room, and I could see everyone's aura. They glowed. It was beautiful. Eventually, the talk wound down, and I went outside with my girlfriend, and the asphalt path didn't glow with an aura, but it was alive, and I could feel the connection between me and the path. The trees were glowing with auras. We went home. I tried to go to sleep and found I couldn't, and I was flooded with the beginning of creation. I was God. I was in that act of the first separation, the first duality, which is the only thing that made creation possible. And then it went through all of the waves of duality. And since I was Catholic, I had this sort of creation story of archangels and angels and men and women and all of that. And it wasn't something I was imagining. I was just there. And I wasn't actually in my mind. I was just in awareness, watching all of this happen. So I can't go into everything that happened with all this because I don't have time for that. But this is where I ended up. After a week of not eating or sleeping, scared the crap out of my girlfriend, and she took me to the Student Health Center, and I was in Stanford Hospital in a mental ward about 15 minutes later. And I spent 4 weeks there being given antipsychotic medication, talking to psychiatrists who had not a clue what I was experiencing. It wasn't helpful to me. Eventually, I left Stanford Hospital against medical advice. I was still, none of this touched where I was. I was still way out of my body. one of the big parts of this experience was that the meaningfulness of my human life dwindled into insignificance. It was a teeny little speck. I didn't lose it completely, but I was out in the immensity of meanings in these wider universes. And so I was clearly in quite an altered state of consciousness to the people that were interacting with me. I ended up, after a while, going home to Minnesota, which is where my folks were. I went into a hospital there to get physically checked out. They did a week of tests on me. Everything was completely normal. And then I tried to leave, and they put me on a 72-hour hold. This was about 6 months after One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest happened. And I had visions of drugs, electroshock, and then the lobotomies. And so that was worse to me than the idea of dying. And somehow when that whole thing went down, from maybe 2 months of being completely open, loving, at one with the universe, I was angry at the psychiatrist that did that to me, and I was terrified. So somehow I think that kind of brought me back. And I spent the next 40 years trying to find out, well, what had happened. And the best explanation I ever heard from it was I had the opportunity to tell this to Adyashanti. I don't know if you know him, but he's a non-dualism teacher in California, an awakened being. And he said, look, you had a partial awakening. You awakened to your transcendent self. But if you had been able to keep awakening, keep your awareness expanding, eventually you would have come to that non-dual place where you were both human and transcendent. And I didn't get there. And I think that's one of the too bads about the lack of awareness of spiritual emergence and emergency. This was about 20 years before Stan and Christina Groff coined that term. So I'm going to leave that there because what I wanted to talk most about was a shared death experience that I had. This was my first wife, Chris. We were married in April of 1987. We had 2 wonderful children. That's my daughter, Kate, she's 30 now, and my son, Logan, who's 28. They're just sweeties. Somewhere between this picture and this picture, Chris was diagnosed with papillary thyroid cancer. And we thought for about 5 years it was fine, because thyroid cancer is usually easily treatable. Turns out her cancer did not uptake radioactive iodine, which is the main treatment. And so we went through years of surgeries. We tried radioactive iodine treatments, things like that. And so this went on for 19 years, basically. At one point, this is down in Brazil, and we had gone down there to try to find alternative healing. And it did help us a lot. And life went on, basically. We treated this as like it was diabetes or something, a serious ongoing medical condition, but not one that was necessarily fatal. And these are my kids, almost grown up. And this is a picture of Chris in the fall of the year before she died. So if you're going to turn away, this is the time to do it. These are some pictures that might be a little hard. Part of me wants to just kind of dwell on these pictures because it's important. But I also don't want to basically offend anyone. So this is Chris in the hospital. So what happened was in the last summer of her life, which was the summer of 2012, so it's 7.5 years ago, she got water in her lungs. She was having trouble breathing, running out of breath quickly. And we didn't know what was happening. I'm not going to go into all the medical details, but in a nutshell, what happened was her cancer mutated from a regular, well-defined cell boundary form of cancer to an anaplastic form. And that's without boundaries. It's sort of universally virulent. And it took over the entire, it put tumors all through her right lung, some into the heart, some into the liver, and it was making her organs shut down. So these are my kids in the hospital. This is where the shared death experience happened. In the last couple hours of her life, a nurse invited me to be in the hospital bed with Chris. And I'm so glad I did that. I'm so grateful to that nurse. Her body was kind of cold, and her heart wasn't beating very well, so it was getting lumpy. It was kind of like wet cement that was hardening. But I could tell that it comforted her that I was there in bed with her. And I'm there trying to be sad and grieve. So I'm going to go off this, but this shows where she was and where I was having this experience. This is her body after it was ready for cremation, and her ashes are buried in a cemetery in Palo Alto. So the shared death part of this is that, you know how, like, you have a sense of that's Yvonne, that's her identity, or that's Dana, that's her identity. I had that same sense. This was Chris, this was her identity. But the being that she was much, much larger and more multidimensional than I could actually comprehend in my brain. I just knew it was her. I knew that there was this incredible love and sense of uplift, and it was streaming from her into my right side. And I was sitting there, lying there, just feeling this. And then I had a thought, like my son Logan was having a really hard time looking at her. And so he was resting his head on his hands and then his hands on my left thigh. And I knew he was having a rough time. So when I thought, oh, I wonder how Logan's doing with this, boom, that sense of uplift and joy and all that left. It was cut off. And in fact, I found that any time I actually thought anything, boom, it was cut off. But if I just paid attention, if I was just there, feeling her, it was inexpressible. Like I said, it was paradoxical because I had been scared. I didn't know how we were going to get through this. I was sad at the thought of losing her, and yet I couldn't be sad. So another thing that was extraordinary about that is we had a good love. We loved each other a lot, but we also were human beings, and we had plenty of our own issues. We had our differences in terms of how we treated one another. We had hurt each other. So there were things that were, binding me up, basically. Now, those issues, they didn't just dissolve. They somehow miraculously resolved. They came to the right ending. And I don't know how to put all this stuff into words, but I'm trying because I think it's important. How I knew it resolved was I had this sensation strongly that she would always love me and be there with me, and I would always love her and be there with her wherever we were. So this was my dog Riley. He passed away a couple years ago, but he was a 10-pound little cockapoo, and he would just sit on my lap. And for about 2 months after Chris passed, this feeling of uplift and joy was strongly present. And I went back to work as a therapist. I took care of all the details you have to do when somebody passes away. But I didn't watch TV, I didn't read, wasn't interested in music, which I love. I just worked and sat for several months. And Riley helped me get through that time. So let's talk about this. So I'll just say this. After a couple months, I went through, I don't know, maybe a 6-month period where I was incredibly lonely. I felt like a forest fire had come into my life and burned it down. I couldn't talk to Chris anymore. We did a lot of things together. It was like my life was over. And it took a while for new green shoots to grow back, but they did eventually. A couple months after Chris had passed away, I had my first in-the-night experience of her. She came to me, and Chris was a marriage and family therapist who specialized in working with emotionally disturbed adolescents, mostly in the school systems. And so she comes to me and she says, "Brian, you and I have to go to therapy." I said, "How come, Chris?" She said, "You need to have your head examined. You think I died." It was just as clear as I'm talking to you right now. It was different than a dream because there wasn't any of this morphing into different scenes. It was linear, it was grounded, and there was no problem at all remembering what happened. So I had half a dozen of those kinds of communications with Chris, and it was important to me because for a while I was torn in terms of she and I hadn't had a chance to talk about what my life and the kids' life would be like after she passed. And I had some mixture about, I didn't want to be alone all my life, but I had mixed feelings about opening up to anyone else. So. And some of those communications really helped me, and I won't go into that either, unless there's questions about that later. So, about 9 months after she passed away, there was that one picture of our family from Maui. I don't know if you remember that. I guess I can go back and see that. This is in Maui. We had done every few years, we loved to go to Maui as a family. And so Kate and Logan and I went to Maui about 9 months after Chris had passed. And while I was there, I tried communicating with her. And I'm going to read you some of what this was. And why I think this is important is not only for us to learn a little bit more about what life might be like on the other side, but I think it informs us in terms of what our sort of small self trying to understand our deeper spiritual self. I think that's the main value of this. So, okay, so this is me. Hi, Chris. We're here at the Hale Pauhana in Maui. I wish you were here with Kate, Logan, and me. I know you'd enjoy it as much as I do. I asked you to bring us turtles and dolphins, and yesterday we saw 4 turtles. One had a softball-sized shell under its left flipper, grabbed on for the ride. There was also a young turtle, maybe 18-inch wide shell. The others were larger. The first day snorkeling Friday, we saw 3 turtles, all right here at Hale Pauhana, more than we've seen in any other trip. So I'm guessing you're doing that. I would like to hear from you what your life is like now. Are you willing to communicate? I'm getting yes through my guides. Chris, it is difficult to talk to you directly. I'm not sure, but let's try. There is inner support for this project. It's actually quite strong. I am working with the Davis here in Maui to send the turtles, and we'll try for dolphins as well. One of the difficulties is to communicate the emotions. I know you care so much about that, and we struggled for the way to do so. I can try to tell you about here, but it's true that there are more dimensions involved than we dealt with in our physical forms. And without those points of reference, it plain doesn't make sense. The things in common, or the threads underlying all, are love and caring and purpose. It's also true that learning is a continual theme. Imagine that everything, and I do mean everything, that you think is manifested in some form, some creation that can take on a life of its own. So if you're angry about the car cutting in front of you and then going slowly, and imagine the rubber melting off its tires, if you're here, that would happen with possibly disastrous consequences. Of course, we travel by thinking about where we want to go, so there are no cars here. But the point is, the suffering there prompts one to learn to carry love and concern in thoughts and hearts. So that is what manifests here. There are indeed levels of like-minded individuals here, although our service involves being willing to travel and work in levels less refined than your own may be. This is true all the way down to life on earth. Me. Do you still have a personal relationship with me and the kids? Chris, not as you understand it. I love you and Kate and Logan unreservedly and completely, and send you my love and best wishes constantly. It isn't as self-oriented as the love we shared in our physical bodies, partly because these larger dimensions make it more clear that we are all connected and that love is what connects us. So it's not as narrow in focus. That's why one of your questions, how can we love multiple people from our many past lifetimes, doesn't really make sense here. The distinctions, the uniqueness of everyone that are so important there just aren't as important here, yet without losing the relevance and the meaning of life's sufferings there. I said, will we be together after I die? Chris, we're together now and forever. You're part of me and I am part of you. After you die, you realize that ever so much more clearly. Me. Have you been with Karen and your mom? Karen was her next younger sister. She passed away a year before Chris did from cancer. And her mom passed away when Chris was 23. And she thought about her every day of her life. And it was a strong parallel for me because my daughter Kate was 23 when her mom passed. So have you been with Karen and your mom? Yes, but not as separate beings. Your picture of life continuing much as it is there, just with more ethereal bodies, isn't the way it is. There are many more resonances here, like multiple harmonies vibrating so completely it's difficult to make distinctions between what is me and what is the rest of the beings. Communicating is wearing, partly because it takes so much effort to separate out what you think of as Christy. So this was a couple days later. I said, even though I have a sense of communicating, I still miss you so much. Logan said this afternoon that it's quieter without you, and it's true. I miss your music, your bubbling, infectious caring, and holding your hand. I don't really want to start a life without you, but there's no choice. Just as you had no choice when your body shut down. What does all this look like from there? Chris, I am so sorry that you are being asked to burn through this, to allow the smaller things in life to boil away, because nothing diverting is going to withstand these emotions. You volunteered for a hard mission, a necessary one. You don't understand you won't understand for some time what this is, but in the changed times ahead, this suffering will help others who will need it so much and not have it unless you prevail through the sadness, despair, and the lack of joy. You really appreciate the qualities I gave to you and the kids and miss soaking in them. So they have to come from deep within you now, from the one place. It's your caring that will bring them out. It seems too hard, but didn't we go through so much beyond what we thought we could do? I love you, dear one. Just a couple more. So this is a few days later. Hi, Chris. Yesterday I swam in McKenna Bay and saw a large manta ray. Today, snorkeling, I saw 3 turtles and Kate saw 2 more. There's no question in my mind you're helping. I saw the dolphin fins here at Hali'Pauhana. It's a nice way of showing you're still here, involved. Chris. If you keep trying, we can talk more clearly. Belief is so important, can get in the way so easily. I'm glad you could come to our place in Maui and enjoy the ocean, the sun, and each other's company. Loving and caring are what we do here on this side. That is what things are made of here. The love literally takes form and creates. Observing the creation is what feeling the love is. It's a way of communicating. Okay, and finally, this was about a week later. Chris, I felt you powerfully in my therapy session today. That was my own personal therapy. Thinking of you on the beach at Hali'Pauhana in your white cotton t-shirt dress with the blue flowers, I feel your energy. Are you there in a form I can relate with? Are your concerns still including enough of the human to make sense to me? She says, I can love you more fully, more than I was able to manage while in my physical body, and perhaps more than you can manage in yours. I can relate enough to human concerns to communicate and to have a relationship with you. I am proud of your efforts to be in clearer relationship to yourself and others, and I know it's difficult. The energies are strong, enough to pull your psyche apart if you are not focused and in touch with what you've been calling wise self. So one of the things I want to say about this is I read this to my kids, to Kate and Logan, and they said, boy, that sure doesn't sound like Mom. It doesn't sound like she sounded. It wasn't the way she spoke. And I agreed with them. It doesn't completely, but maybe it's how she is now, in a more wise self. And my son Logan said, you know, it makes me sad that you see sort of life this way, that it's so different than how I look at the world. And I asked him later, I said, well, how do you look at the world? And he said, well, I don't know that you can communicate with people that have passed on. I don't know what happens when we die. I don't know what your spirit is. And so one of the things that I can say is that doing our journeys where we're having these spiritual awakening kinds of experiences does bring up some loss, right? I have to say my truth even if it makes my son feel sad. But I also regret that I'm so far out there compared to where he is. And I know personally from my hospitalization experiences that you definitely can be accused of being crazy. So I guess I want to say I'm not sure that this was Chris. I think it is. I'm not sure that life on the other side is like that, but I think that it can help us to understand ourselves better. And that's why I'm sharing it here. So I want to share some of the lessons I've learned from all of this. So one of them is clearly we are three-dimensional small beings in a body and in a personality. That is us, but we are also infinite, divine, multidimensional beings, simultaneously and paradoxically. And that multidimensional self is outside of time and space. And thoughts and emotions and sensations don't go there. So when we're, from our 3D perspective, trying to be with our deeper self, mind doesn't get it. So as Adyashanti says, the mind is in pursuit of a truth that it can never comprehend, it can't ever grasp it. But that doesn't mean that it's not true and it's not there. It just means that when we pay attention to there, it does have an effect on our thoughts and our emotions and our feelings that is positive. So awareness is in both places. It's in our small selves, and it's in this infinite self. I personally think awareness is our infinite, multidimensional self. It's awareness. It's consciousness. Attention is how we focus awareness, and we can direct attention by thought. So we can shift, each of us can shift between focusing on our thoughts and our emotions and our feelings and focusing on the stillness and the emptiness in between. And I think that self is emptiness, but it's paradoxically got everything, all potentialities in it. And it includes love, light, and darkness. If we focus on our thoughts and darkness, just like my experience with Chris, it can cut off that awareness of the love and light. So, practically speaking, it's not to try to get rid of thoughts, but you can shift the focus of your attention, right? From your thoughts and feelings and sensations to this other thing, and just try to hang out there. And that has a positive effect, and I do that in meditation every morning. Our beliefs get in our way. Our beliefs that we are just this small body, small self, that we're not worthy or we're not good enough. Those are blockages to your ability to touch in with your full self. And you hear these presentations that sound like, okay, really extraordinary and special things happen, but don't be confused. They're not necessary for each and every one of us to feel our deeper self. That's one of my main messages, is we all can do this, and it's simply a matter of shifting attention. So our fears are in little selves. Our multidimensional selves always have been, always will be. They're changeless. So one of the benefits of us switching focus like that is there's plenty for my small self to worry about. You know, the situation with Iran, you know, all what's happening that feels kind of scary and crazy in the world, it can scare the small me. But I can be both comforted and can have a better perspective on things and make better choices if I'll focus occasionally on my infinite multidimensional self, because it's always okay with everything. It's not okay with my personality that Chris went through the suffering she did and that she died, but it is okay. It's a paradoxical thing. So to me, the point of awakening is to know yourself both as a small human self and as an infinite self. And that allows us to be more aware and present in each and every moment, here and now, and to notice love creating. And when you do that, you know that you're loved. We're each and every one of us deeply, deeply loved. Completely. And if we allow it, if we allow divine awareness, it will come into each and every broken, separated, hurting, lonely part of my human self. But I have to not turn away from that. My personality has to not turn away from that because I don't like it. I don't like how I feel or it makes me feel. If you are with this, then the divine awareness is right there. So, how much time do I have?
Like 10 minutes.
About 10 minutes, okay. So, one of the things I want to say, this is Dana and me. We met about almost 6 years ago now, down in Brazil. I had gone back to try to deal with my grieving, and I met this wonderful person. who is agreed to be my partner in this life here. So I'm so grateful to you, Dina. I'll return to that. I'm going to leave this here. So I wanted to do just a few minutes of not just talking about this, but in inviting each of you to have an experience of what I'm talking about. So I want to, if you're willing, to have you just do a little bit of a guided meditation. Okay. So take a couple deep breaths. Let your belly go out first. Fill your lungs from the bottom up. And just let that all out. Now I want you to focus your awareness, just by thinking about it, focus your awareness on the awareness in your head. And it's not on the thoughts that awareness is noticing. What I'm asking you to focus on is what's aware of the thoughts. So it's an awareness of awareness exercise. And that awareness notices that thoughts come and go. But it doesn't come and go, it's always there. And then focus your awareness in your chest. And focus on the awareness there that's aware of what you're feeling. Not on the feelings themselves, but on the awareness of the feelings. And notice, is that awareness different than the awareness in your head? Was it easier to notice the awareness in your head or than your heart? And then move your awareness down into your belly, into your gut. And again, focus on the awareness that's aware of the body sensations, not focusing on the body sensations themselves. So again, awareness of awareness. Now again, the thoughts come and go, the emotions come and go, the sensations come and go. Give yourself just a minute to notice what doesn't come and go. And the more you do this with no expectations, no attachment to however it turns out, the easier it will be. Okay. So this kind of exercise is most easy to do when you are in quiet and you have a moment, 10, 15 minutes, or I do it for an hour and a half, and just be with it. So all I can do today is give you a teeny little taste, but I hope that was useful. So I put this picture in here. This is the granddaughter of some friends of ours, and you can just see in Allie's face, her eyes. She's everything I'm talking about here. But the interesting thing is maybe it's a little less differentiated. It's more universal. It's more. So that's it. Thank you for your attention.